As the stomping grew louder, an even larger figure emerged from the other side of the flying brain tornado. A shape looming 15 feet tall in a dim, flickering green light. Like the pressure cooker bitch, or whatever that was. It had a largely metallic appearance, though at the same time strangely organic. Its spindly, nearly skeletal body didn't seem like it should have been heavy enough to rattle the floor so violently. Its large bony feet terminated in thin, sword-like talons. Most of its weight was likely concentrated in its head, immediately recognizable as the shape of a sausage grinder, slowly waving with each laborious step. A pair of slimy eyeballs, like the Burgrr Man's, stared back at me from one side of this huge contraption, and where there should have been a handle was only a black skeletal arm, ending in another one of those white cartoonish gloves. Its worst characteristic, by far, was the way it breathed. A hollow, metallic wheeze of increasing speed and intensity. The panting of some starving dog who just caught a whiff of fresh roadkill. It stepped effortlessly from one catwalk to another, like a spider scrambling in slow motion along the strands of its web. And as it drew closer, something unimaginably worse began to happen. The meat. All the meat I had just slaughtered for at least the second time was beginning to move once more. As one, the mutilated horror around me began to writhe, stumble, and drag themselves towards the grinder-headed giant, whose single arm shot out the moment one groping, rolling pile of giblets came within its impressive reach. It lifted the shiny, sticky mass up to the filth-caked funnel on the top of its grinder head and dropped it straight in. It continued to stomp its way in my general direction, scooping up more monsters and dumping them into its upper orifice until they were nearly spilling over the sides. A churning bathtub full of flesh and innards. The thing was slow, but as I ran from one end of the spider's web to the next, I found every possible exit sealed tight, and by now, the meat rising from below had almost reached my level. There was no way out. There was nothing to fight. I could only keep running. I turned to look back at the grinder being, still ponderously but relentlessly pursuing me in a straight line as I was forced to zigzag. It snatched up the last straggling monster, some sort of spider-legged white pod resembling nothing I'd really recognize, and dumped it in with the rest. Without slowing down, the monster clenched its now blood-soaked glove and began spinning its entire arm in its socket, around and around with a ratchet-like noise. The collected mutants churning and twisting as they were sucked deeper into the grinder. I turned to continue running, but only made it a few more yards before a sickening, flatulent, sputtering sound echoed through the chamber, and something thick, warm, and wet slammed hard into my back. The catwalk dropped away as I was swung through the air and brought to face the grinder man's unblinking gaze. I was being held tight in an enormous pulpy pink hand, wavering on the end of the tentacled limb comprised entirely of raw ground meat. It had formed a limb from every walking nightmare I'd spent the last of my energy putting down, and flung it like a lizard's tongue with pinpoint accuracy, instantly subduing me from a good 20 meters away. I squirmed and thrashed desperately, but only felt further mired in the dense, tarry muck. The crank arm continued to twist, and more squirming noodles of processed tissue slithered along the length of its makeshift appendage, cocooning me in more layers of raw flesh. I was reminded yet again of a spider. As I sank deeper into that stinking, sloppy mire, I suddenly found myself transfixed by what was directly behind the metallic giant. I could finally see into the tower, into the vortex, down into where those wretched alien-brained hatchers were all going in such a hurry. At first I was only confused. The significance of what I was seeing almost didn't want to register. Bitter, rancid meat juices were beginning to flood my mouth. Tendrils of beef sludge were probing my eyes and nose. My world was going black. I was being smothered to death. But on the inside, I just couldn't stop laughing.